Hey everyone, welcome to today's edition of One Single Story, where each weekday we offer a brief lesson from a section of the daily reading from the One Year Bible and expand on the topic from last Sunday's sermon. This week we're focusing on principles of parenting. I'm Stephen Mizell, and I'm joined by Wendy Korbusieski and Chris Rexroad. So let me read a couple of verses from the Old Testament that come right in the middle of this dramatic story. So in 1 Kings chapter 1, verses 6 is what I'll read. It says, "Now his father David had never disciplined him at any time, even by asking, 'Why are you doing that?'" So in our episode yesterday, we talked about the importance of parents learning how to discipline their children. The passage today is a prime example of the dangers that can be created when parents fail to do that. So this story is rather lengthy, so let's just kind of flesh it out so the audience will understand kind of what's happening here.
Well, the story begins with David in his final days. By this time, he's older, he's weak. One of his older sons, Adoniah, saw this as a chance to seize the throne without David's approval. He held a private feast, coronation feast, that gathered supporters and key leaders like Joab, the commander of David's army, and Abiathar, the priest. The issue is that God had already made his clear choice on Solomon was to be
just stop right here. I don't discipline anybody about how they pronounce Bible names because I'm fully capable of blowing one up.
Butchering them in a minute.
I knew I was going to butcher some of them. God had already made his clear choice that Solomon was supposed to be the son that inherited David's throne. Adoniah was not only making a power grab, but he was going completely out of God's will. The key point to Adoniah's character flaws is that he'd never been properly confronted by his father, which is a terrible thing to do. If you don't raise your kids right, they're going to be problems. And the scripture states that David had never even asked a question like, "Why are you doing that?"
Wendy, what do you think was the main character flaw that was created by David's lack of discipline?
Adonijah had developed this sense of entitlement and a total disregard for authority. And so a lack of discipline consistently produces this sense of entitlement.
How did David respond to Adoniah's power grab?
Well, Adonijah's secret feast forced the hand of people who were loyal to David, and they were, wise about that. In particular, it was Nathan the prophet, Bathsheba, who was Solomon's mother, and they went to David and reminded him about that promise that he had made to make Solomon king and urged him to take action on that promise. And so David responded immediately with a kind of a bold decision, and he ordered Nathan, Zadok the priest, and Benaiah to anoint Solomon king right then. And so they also publicly paraded him through the streets on David's own mule as a clear sign of that royal authority that Solomon then immediately had. And so the message was loud and clear. When Adonijah and his followers heard that celebration going on, they had panic, and so Adonijah ran to the altar to claim sanctuary because he thought Solomon was going to take him out right then and there. And so David kind of, he made the right decision there for the nation, but he also had failed because he had failed to discipline Adonijah.
So what's the parenting lesson that we get from this?
I think this is not just here. I have preached this before. Mm-hmm. I think this is David's flaw.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Family in general. Saul is his father-in-law. My opinion is he should have killed Saul. Mm-hmm. Right? That we can debate that one all we want to. But I think he didn't. And we can say it was because it was God's anointed, but he was doing horrendous things to the nation, right? Mm-hmm. He needed to go. How many people suffered because they let him stay in leadership? But we see this with his sons. We see this with Amnon, who raped his sister, who he did nothing about. We see it with Absalom, because Absalom gets angry, and then, later he comes back, and David runs instead of saying, you're not the king, go away. And then we see this here. So I think we see an example of the importance of disciplines. David's failure set clear boundaries for Adonijah, creating a leadership crisis. And this literally could have torn the kingdom apart. Second, I think it's a reminder that even when parents make mistakes, we still have to boldly make the right choice when it comes to guiding our children in proper roles, right? Especially when the future of our family may be involved. And I can speak to this, in my own life. I have made some mistakes, but it shouldn't require me to be silent when those same issues crop up, in my kids' life. I still have to speak to it because right is right and wrong is wrong, even if I failed, in a particular area. And so God has this unique calling and purpose for every child, and it's the job of the parents to help them discover it and affirm it. And with proper discipline, you can sometimes feel like you're playing favorites, right? It looks that way. Because you're choosing one over another when you're affirming proper roles. But you can't shrink back from the responsibility of guiding and leading your family, especially if a course correction is necessary. And so, have you ever found yourself in a situation where you had to make a tough call about one of your children's futures?
Yes, unfortunately. And the hard thing is, it involves like this risk and this relational tension. But you have to call it out. And it's hard. It requires courage because it's like you can see the train wreck coming. And, you don't want to damage relationships, but you'd rather them, for lack of a better word, hate you forever than to either see them dead and buried or, ruin their life forever. And so it's tough parenting, but you have to do it, and you've got to rely on your faith in order to kind of guide you through those things and those biblical wisdom in order to get you kind of through those things. And you've got to be willing to, especially when they're adult children, your role is not to dominate the situation, but redirect as best as you can. But you have to set some hard boundaries and some deep lines in the sand and say, this is it. That, you've got to, this is the line. And because the Lord disciplines the ones he loves, and so I have to as well.
We've had some situations raising the boys, and I think probably the hardest one that I had was with my oldest son, and kids always had a good heart. But he got mixed up in some stuff, and I told him, and this is him as a young adult. So he's graduated, he's living with me. And we just had a couple rules in the house. Like, if you're going to live here, if you're moving forward with your education, doing something to better your future and working at least a part-time job, you're good. You don't have to pay rent, whatever. We even took care of their cell phones. If you're going to drop below that or something, we expect you to work and pay for stuff and everything. But there are things that are not allowed in our house, whatever your friends are doing and stuff like that. But after a couple occurrences, we had to ask him to move out, which broke my heart. And I couldn't let that be displayed too much because I had to stand my ground. And he knew right away. Matter of fact, I didn't even have to say it to him. He actually approached me. And that I don't know if that was harder on him or on me, but that was a big learning curve for him. And I have no regrets on that, but it still hurts my heart, like right now, even just talking about it. But seeing who he's become from that change that he made was definitely beneficial, but hard in the moment.
Yeah, I get the unique privilege of being my kid's father, pastor, and boss. I've had to terminate a kid
from employment.
Yeah. I've thought about the other more than one time. No lie. Just want to be clear.
Just
about
clarifying.
That. Yeah. It's not easy. And figuring out, one of the practices that I've made is sometimes I'll have to say literally, okay, I'm taking I'm putting this particular hat on. I want you to know that this is the hat that I'm wearing right now. And this is why I'm doing this. And, I think you, from time to time, have to make tough calls about your children's future. Mm-hmm. And sometimes they're younger and sometimes they're older, and it's complicated and difficult, and everybody, which leads to the next question, right? So how do you affirm unique gifts and callings of each of your children without making one feel less valued than the others? And I know this is a challenge because I wear so many hats in my kids' life, that often either they or other people, they're like, why can't I do the same thing, or why can't they do the same thing? Because, right? Just because, right? And we don't, they're not gifted to do X, right? They're not, wired to do X. They're not whatever, it's like saying, there are some, you can take this ever how you want to take it. It's going to land hard in some places. There are movements who say, churches, everybody should be allowed to speak. No, everybody should not.
Nope.
Some people suck at it. Some people have no filter. Some people have no common sense. Some people have no ability. Some people have all of these things, right? They have bad theology. Some people have, so no, the answer is no, not everybody should, right? It doesn't make one person better than the other, right? There are lots of things I can't do.
That's right.
In the church, right? I just happen to have one of the gifts that gets elevated, unfortunately, on the earthly kingdom, but it doesn't make it less than. You know? And even in our family, we have kids who have varying gifts, and some gifts make it easier for them to do certain things, while others don't. You have to accept that and say, okay, hey, affirm the things you can affirm, and not stress about the ones you can.
To me, it drives me straight back to Growth Track 2, when we speak about Ephesians 2:10, that everyone is God's handiwork, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, uniquely gifted with gifts and abilities. Uniquely, everybody has their own unique gift. They were created in advance to do good works. That they were created for a purpose.
But unique ones.
Unique ones
to them.
Yeah. In advance. So there was something that they were designed to do in advance before they were created. But not everybody was created to do the same thing.
That is a parenting trap. And because we believe in equality.
Right.
We want everything's got to be equal.
Right. And
it can't be.
No. And if I've said this once to my kids, I've said it 100 times. Fair does not mean equal. Fair does not mean equal. So what is fair does not mean that because you got this, they're also going to get this. It's what is appropriate for you. Means what's going to be appropriate for you, and it's based on what your needs are and even what their needs are.
When he gave out the gifts, when he tells the parable of giving the gifts, some got 5, some got 2, one got 1.
That's right.
Why didn't they all get 5? Or why didn't they take 8 and divide them up by 3? Why didn't they do that? Because he said, according to their own ability.
Right.
He said. It says that gifts were given according to their own ability. And we try to give things based on position. You're my child and you're my child, so you both get the same thing. Or we overcompensate for another one because we see one getting opportunities, and sometimes that's needed. It frustrated me as a kid. Even as a young adult, the reason I call my brother the baby Jesus is because they treated him that way. Now we can talk about it as adults today, right? Not with him present. Especially my dad and I would talk about it, but he would say things like, "I knew you would land on your feet," right? Raymond is geared different, right? And so you couldn't. They felt like he needed the support, you know? Like the example. The time I remember being most hurt was I moved. to Cresswell, out in the boondocks, to a podunk church with 17 people, no money. 6 months after I moved, my brother moves to Elizabeth City, to a church that paid a full salary, had a much larger congregation. It wasn't a big congregation, but they paid full salary. They had a parsonage. I was living in a single wide trailer. My dad took a position in the state office. It was an administrative position. He was a director before he was an overseer. And when you leave the pastorate, you still have to be a member of a local church. He chose to be a member of his church and pay his tithes there. And it pissed me off. We've had conversation about it since, and I laugh about it. He was like, you were going to figure it out. That's what he would tell you. You were going to figure it out. We needed to make sure that the church had the money that he needed to be, because you were going, and he was right. I can create things. I can figure it out. Raymond's not necessarily that way. He's much more managerial than I am. Sometimes kids don't understand it, and I did not understand it. Mm-hmm. My dad will talk about it today. He didn't talk about it when we were younger. I didn't understand it. And I do think sometimes it's healthy to have a conversation about, this is their gift and this is your gift and this is why I'm supporting them.
And what was really good for our kids is the ability to talk to them about their love language. Mm-hmm. We had those conversations with them early on in regards to their gifts and abilities as well, because how we would reward them. Like for Evan, he loved gifts, special gifts that really spoke to him. But Brianna was quality time. Mm-hmm. So for her, what really excited her was an outing or an adventure, doing something together. But what looked like that for Evan was an item. Mm-hmm. So again, fair was not necessarily equal. Mm-hmm. And so we had the opportunity to talk about, how you're wired, how you're made, and how you're gifted, and what, that looks like, and how we treat you, and how you're rewarded, and how your strengths are, and what we do for you. Mm-hmm. So we were able to have those conversations.
Both of our boys, they were very different growing up. They were, weren't treated the exact same. But I mean, you can't do that. I mean, you can't treat them the exact same, because if you do, I mean, you're going to be depleting them of something that they need to have poured into them, just because of their uniqueness and stuff. And I think as long as you are pouring into each one of them, hopefully more with building their character and applauding the areas that they're doing well in and helping them in the areas that they struggle, equally in that, it can look different for each kid, and that's okay.
Well, thank you for joining us today on this edition of One Single Story. We hope you'll be back with us tomorrow as we continue a conversation around our daily Bible reading from the One Year Bible.